Always good to hear praise of God together. We're going to talk a little bit in a moment just how worthy that is, but to be able to come together, talk about who our God, that He is worthy, who He is the joy of my week. I really appreciate everybody's participation in that. It's a highlight always. We'll say this. January was a record amount of snow. I think we went back maybe 30 years. And February is basically going to be summer, it feels like. So this is good. A change in climate. I know when I first moved here, I tease some of you locals a lot. I would say things like, now that the sun's out, I'll turn my sprinklers back on. I know that's not true. But it is nice to feel the warmth of the sun. It's funny in Colorado. It can be cold out, but you always need your sunglasses when you're driving, and you need your AC because it's going to get really hot with that sun coming in through your windows, and that's a great blessing. Lots to be thankful for, lots to be mindful of. But let's just jump right in. The last time we talked about, and just to clarify, I kind of kicked off our Sinners Anonymous for the year. We're not doing it all year long. It's going to be once a month is the way we'll do those 12 steps together. So we're back to the idols, at least for now. In the next 3 weeks, we'll do this. And we're going to call out the idol today. Last week was more. This week is the idol called success. You could call it significance, but I think there's a slight difference there. And the premise is this. Calling for all of our allegiance is something that plays on our natural desire to be significant, to count for something, to maybe even leave something behind us that lasts or endures beyond us. And I would just say about that's a fine thing. That's okay. But sometimes our desire to appear significant or to look successful can lead to a wrong kind of worship. So no matter how successful you are at things within this world, or how successful you appear to be, it isn't really success if you don't end up where you need to be. And that's the way I want to look at it this morning. Like God designed us. God has a plan for us. He has a destination for us. And so that's where He wants to lead us to. And even when in life we switch up His destination for what we want and apply godly principles to that, it doesn't necessarily mean we're guaranteed success in God's eyes. And so I had an example of that. John Bartholomew Roberts was great at being a sea captain. In fact, he was so good, he didn't captain one ship, he captained 3 ships. He had the Fortune, the Good Fortune, and the Royal Fortune, and if you caught on by names, they were all doing pretty good. He was a demanding captain. It was said that on his ships he had musicians. They were there to play music and on call, no matter what time of the day or night, to play that music, except Sundays, because the captain viewed Sunday as a day of rest and religious observance. On all of these ships, Captain Roberts had the ideal that there was no alcohol at all. It was a temperance-only captain. And he made sure there was no gambling aboard any of his ships. And if anyone were to smuggle a woman onto one of his ships, that man was hanged. And so this was a man who ran, in every sense of the word, a tight ship. He was a great sea captain. Unfortunately, he was a pirate. And he captured an average of 100 ships a year, which is crazy for a 4-year period of his career. Ruthless. He was the most feared man on the sea. Black Bart might be the name you know him by. But here's my point. With all of his religion, his morality, his discipline, his efficiency, his effectiveness, though very successful in his field, he did it all for the sake of evil. He was successful and used some good strategies to do evil things. This is why, for the Christian, just being successful at something in this world isn't the ultimate goal of our value or our worth, because it's possible to be very successful at something and yet be evil or displeasing to God. And so I want to just spend our time, as we think about this concept this morning, learning how we could all avoid being a successful failure. And it starts by asking the very real question, how do you define success? And that's not as simple as it sounds at first. What do you do, secondly, with the abilities that God's given you? Are you truly a success if in the end you don't end up where you're supposed to be? And I think these are questions that Jesus would ask of a people who worship the idol of success. Because success, I believe, is a worthy goal. It's just a worthless God. And so to start, I just want to put this in your mind that as an ideal, success fits. It's there. Jesus never condemns success in any of his teachings. But there are some misconceptions about success in our world, and so I want to hit a couple of those to start. And the first is this, that if I can be successful, then I will have attained greatness. I will be great. And so many people bow down to the idol of success because they're drawn to this very natural desire for significance, this deep desire to believe that my life really does matter, that there's more to life than doing my work and paying my taxes and not getting into any kind of trouble. And so we're sold this idea that if we could be successful, we would be great at something. And if you're great at something, you jump the line to success. Why do you think youth sports is such a multi-billion-dollar industry in our country? Why do you think the popularity in AP studies and exams has come up? See, we've tried to streamline being great at something. And if we can be great at something, or at least make our children be great at something, they will have success. Because we believe the lie that being great at is what leads to greatness. And I want to tell you, it's not the same thing. You can be great at hitting home runs, or great at learning and reciting information, or great at starring in and starting and running your own business, or great at knowing the market or developing software, or great at music or poetry or any other skill. And society will say, when you're great at those things, you've attained greatness, but you haven't. You're just great at something. And there's a difference. You see, the problem with putting everything into being great at something in this world is that quickly, very many of us will find out not everybody can do it. That's just the reality. Being great at anything is something many people will never attain. Some of us never get there. And even if you do, you get great at something, the reality is, in that moment, it doesn't last. It's not sustainable. Because sometime, somewhere, someone is going to come along and they'll hit more three-pointers than you, or be better at understanding than you, or read the market better than you, or build a bigger and better business than you. So you just can't sustain being great at something. But there's something worse about this as a goal. When you finally reach it, when you're great at that thing, you will find out even that doesn't fill you. It doesn't satisfy you in the end. Lee Strobel is the author of the book Case for Christ. He also wrote Case for Faith, Case for Heaven. He was an award-winning journalist for the Chicago Tribune. He was, by the world standards, a great success in his field. He writes in his first book about the turning point in his life. As an agnostic, as a non-believer, he went down to the basement of the Tribune one time. He was looking for an article he had written a year earlier. Well, this is when everything was printed out, and so folded up in this drawer was all these newspaper articles that he had written. He said, I stood there and I thought, this is it? This is what my life is? And here's what he writes in his book. He says, this is the sum of my life's work. This is what I'm killing myself for. This is what I'm spending time away from my family for a bunch of folded papers already turning yellow in a file cabinet in the basement of a big building. And he thought, success or not, this can't be all there is. So being great at something is not a guarantee that you're going to have a great life, and you could put all your own examples in there. And so it's a lie that success is granted through greatness, but it's also a lie that in any way Jesus condemns success. The God of heaven, the unique creator of all things, did not create us in his image so that we could settle for a life that's just so-so. Little effort, little meaning, little purpose. Jesus teaches us it's okay to be successful. It's okay, actually, he says, to want to be great. But he tells us it's not okay to measure greatness the way the world does. And here's where that comes up in Mark chapter 10 at verse 22 or 42. So Jesus called his disciples together and he said, the other nations have rulers, and you know that those rulers love to show their power over the people. And their important leaders love to use all their authority, but it should not be that way with you. Whoever wants to become great. By the way, wouldn't this be the time when Jesus should not want to become great? He doesn't condemn it. Whoever wants to become great, he simply says, needs to learn the right way of getting there. You must serve the rest of you like a servant. Wanting to become great is not condemned, but how we define it, how we determine it, is something Jesus has a say in. This is a story from 1976. I've heard this my whole life, and you've heard some version of it. It happens almost on repeat. This one happened to be at the Special Olympics, where one athlete running saw another athlete trip and turned around, looked back, and helped him across the line. In fact, the actual story, and some have heard this many ways, that's how it goes over time. Some heard everybody stopped and they all crossed together. One of the founders of the Special Olympics kind of got offended over time at the telling of this story, because he said, I think people just think they have no concept of athleticism, they don't know what the game's about, that somehow they're so not tuned in, they just forgot the game and helped somebody else out. And he was really bothered by it, and so he wrote this. He said, the Special Olympics are not a casual get-together organized to give less fortunate members of the community a day to socialize and perhaps run a foot race or two. They're highly organized sporting events taken very seriously by all involved, with each competitor striving to do his best. It's about trying and succeeding, which makes me like the story more, because actually 2 runners saw from behind them somebody fall, went back as others passed them, and picked that friend up and walked across the finish line together. Now, you need to know this about the Special Olympics. The oath is, let me win. But if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. And so 2 runners knew succeeding was the goal. And they did. They just chose to redefine what success was all about. And I think they nailed it. You see, in a world that defines success by winners and losers, those on top and those below, Jesus says we need to learn that success is determined by service. He teaches us it's better to work with each other than to work against each other, but we have to choose that definition to live by. And the choice usually shows up in the way that we keep score. Now, while success is a great ideal, it is a horrible idol, and the way we keep score can call that into question. And so that's what I want to ask you this morning. How do you keep score in life? You will define success in your life based on the way you keep score in life. My life, my passions, my priorities, my time spent, my money invested, my values, all of these will be defined by the way I choose to keep score in life. And Jesus wants us to stop and examine and maybe change the way we're tallying things up in this life. And so he says in Luke 12 at verse 16, in a story, there was a rich man who had some land which grew a good crop. And he thought to himself, what will I do? I have no place to keep all my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and other goods. Then I can say to myself, I have enough good things stored up to last for many years. Rest, eat, drink, and enjoy life. But God said to him, foolish man, tonight your life will be taken from you. So who will get those things that you prepared for yourself? This is how it will be for those who store up things for themselves and are not rich toward God. And that's the ultimate question I'm asking today. How can we keep score so that success remains our ideal without becoming an idol? And so Jesus gives us a couple clues here, 2 ways really, that we can start to define success and keep score the right way. He says, first of all, success depends on being rich toward God. Just think about that. How can any life be considered a success, no matter how great at anything they are, if in the end the sum total of all they worked for and all their life means is burnt up? How could you count it a success when all you've done and all you've chased and all you've won and all you've collected ultimately perishes? And so Jesus strongly challenges the way we keep score in this life, a system, by the way, that exposes our investment strategies. And this is not just financial investment, it includes it, but it's our strategies. And so here he says in Matthew 6, verse 19, don't store up for yourselves here on earth treasures where moths and rust will destroy, and thieves can break in and steal them. But store your treasures in heaven, where they cannot be destroyed by moths or rust, or where thieves cannot break in and steal them. Your heart will be where your treasure is. I want you to think about treasure for a minute. Jesus is asking, have you been keeping score by seeing who can collect the most stuff that won't last anyway. That, in God's estimation, is foolish. It's a foolish way to keep score. It's not going to count for anything in the end. And so instead of seeing what I can do to be forever remembered here on earth, Jesus says you ought to see what you can do that can be placed in heaven and never taken away. And so here's our example. We did it just a moment ago. Anytime you offer heartfelt worship to God, you recognize who He is and you sing out His praises. You stop life as you normally do it and you focus on who He is and the presence of God. Anytime we do that, we are laying up treasures in heaven. And every time you choose the difficult path of character development, of stopping those things you know or God is opposed to, and putting on those things that are in the image of Christ and becoming more like Jesus. When you do that, you are laying up treasures in heaven. Every time you sacrifice your money or your time or your help to those who are broken so that they might know Jesus and see Jesus, anytime you do that, that is treasure put up in heaven. And whenever you help someone who can't help you back, and maybe no one notices or recognizes you for it, and there's never any attention about it, or no one ever says thank you, then there are treasures you're laying up in heaven. So listen, when this game is finally over, the only thing that's going to matter is how did you keep score. And it reminds me of, and I like Tony Dungy for many reasons, have a couple of his books, but he writes in one. This was a man who won a Super Bowl as a player with the Steelers, and then a Super Bowl in 2006 with the Indianapolis Colts. And during that particular game, that final championship game, he said with about 45 seconds to go, it washed over him. He said, in a little bit of time, I'm going to have to speak to about 100 million people. What am I going to say? And in that brief moment, he put together some thoughts so that when the time came, he said, it's great to win a Super Bowl, but it certainly is not the most important thing in my life. You can have it all and have nothing if you don't have the Lord in your life. Tony Dungy believes this about success. Like that's who he is. Success is a worthless idol, but it is a worthy ideal. Success is an ideal, and it helps us help others ultimately. It helps us help others find who the true God is. And so Jesus says, you not only must be rich toward God, but the second thing, you must be rich toward people. Did you know that Jesus was actually asked how God keeps score? It doesn't word it that way in our Bibles, but that's really what happened when someone came up to Jesus and asked, what's the greatest commandment? They're saying out of all the things God says, what is it that God considers greatness? Like, there's got to be, if you boiled it all down, just one thing. And what I love about that particular question is that Jesus was asked one question and did what? He gave two answers. Because it boils down, Jesus says to this is greatness in the eyes of God, that you love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and that you love your neighbor as yourself. Ultimately, first, love God with everything you've got, but second, you're not doing the first if you don't love people too. So this is success in the eyes of Jesus. We learn to love the one we cannot see by practicing love on those we can see. And so how does God keep score? Love God, love others. You know, the most successful way to become great in God's eyes is to be a blessing on all of His children. And Jesus defines greatness as the willingness to be the least for the benefit of someone else. That's what I want to settle in on here now. This is not an easy path to greatness, by the way. Being a servant to all is not the easiest way, but it is the right way to real success in God's eyes. You know, we just resist this call to be less so that God might make us more. We want to do the opposite. I want to be more, and then maybe God will make more of that. But that's not the way this works. And so knowing this frustration within us, Jesus took a moment with His disciples on the road. They were bickering, and I actually love this scene. They're back there talking, and Jesus is in front, and He turns around and they stop talking. Any parent has been here. What are you talking about? Well, nobody knew. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, they were talking about who's the greatest. They were talking about success. They were talking about who's going to be the most important. And so he stops and calls the 12 to him and says, whoever wants to be the most important must be last of all and servant of all. Now, listen, how is that greatness? Do you struggle with that? Serving all? Seeing myself as, how is that greatness? Well, when it comes to heavenly treasure, just put this on your mind. Apart from right worship and praise and sacrifice, the only other treasure that you see in heaven is people. That's it. Love God, love others. And everything else is just commentary on those two great principles. And there are some great implications with this. Did you know that every day we have the opportunity to be great? Now, pay attention. Because we are gifted by God with situations and circumstances that allow us to do things that God calls great. And Luke 10 is when Jesus stops and tells the story of what that looks like. You see, he answered a man who asked who a neighbor was. As a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, some robbers attacked him. They tore off his clothes and they beat him and they left him lying there, almost dead. And it happened that a priest was going down that road, and when he saw the man, he walked on the other side. And next a Levite came there, and after he went over and looked at the man, he walked by on the other side of the road. And I just want to pause there for a minute and tell you, those two men were probably great at what they did. Led great worship, made great sacrifices. In their profession, they were a success. But they weren't truly great because a brother was still in the ditch. So Jesus goes on and says, a Samaritan traveling down the road, and this is a guy nobody thought could do the right thing, saw where the hurt man was, and when he saw the man, he felt very sorry for him. And the Samaritan went to him, and he poured oil and wine on his wounds, and he bandaged them. And then he put the hurt man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he cared for him. And the next day the Samaritan brought out 2 coins, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, you take care of him until I come again. If there's any more expense, let me know. I will pay. Now, who do you suppose, Jesus says, was a neighbor to that man? Reluctantly, the answer was the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, you're right. You go and do the same. Now, I want to point out, this man's more of a hero now as I'm going through this week. What do we call him, this Samaritan? Yeah, let's change that, by the way. That's not changing God's word. That's a heading most of you have in your Bible. This man is a great Samaritan by Jesus' definition of greatness. And he ought to be recognized as this. This is what it looks like. The man simply did what each one of us has an opportunity to do almost every single day, to stop and bless someone that others have just walked by. And anybody can do it. You don't have to be great at anything to stop and bless another. And that's what Jesus says choosing real greatness looks like. Now don't mishear me. Not everybody can be great at something, but every single one of us can choose to be great as Jesus defines it. And I think we waste so much time struggling over not being great at something. I wish I was great at this, and I wish I was great at that. And what we ought to do is making our focus about being truly great in God's eyes and stopping and blessing those we come across. Martin Luther King said rightly, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't need a college degree to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. Greatness is not a skill set. It's a choice in God's eyes. It's the decision to be a blessing to someone else. My grandfather used to tell me all the time, don't waste your life scratching and clawing to get to the top of the ladder of success. He said, choose to serve on the bottom rung. Nobody wants your position there. You know, I think about him a lot. He taught me a lot. And in my eyes, I think he was great at a lot of things. But it was at his funeral when I saw with my own eyes that he was truly great. When people came from all over to share how he had blessed their lives. And those who couldn't come sent letters and cards to families saying what a blessing he had been in their lives. Now, I just say that's not a statistic the world uses in the game they're playing for greatness. So let me just ask you, to think about your life for a minute. What are you doing with your life that is truly great? We just get a limited amount of time in this game. And I look out here, and some of you are just starting the game, and there's some of us that are past halftime, and honestly, some of you are on the goal line, and that's just the way it goes. What are you doing with the time you have that is great in the eyes of God? And Jesus describes greatness as taking whatever God has blessed you with and investing it in the life of others as a blessing. And so think for a moment. What's the greatest moment in your life to date? I thought about this group a lot this week. There's some of you who've done some great things in this world, had some big moments. But you know, the more you focus in on Scripture and think about what Jesus calls greatness, all those fade away. And the people come to light, don't they? The people that put into your life blessed you. Those people you shared the Lord with and you were able to bless them. They all come to focus. When you get real about being great and having success, all of the pictures start to change. And in fact, the heavenly treasures that are really there start to come into focus. And so just think for a minute. Those of you who are committed to your marriage, to love and to honor and respect one another in the fear of Christ. I just want to put this out there to those who are not married. That doesn't come without sacrifice. I know. You've argued. You've had differences. You've had hard times, patches, seasons, sometimes years, but your commitment to love and honor one another is still there. And I want you to know this because the world won't tell you. You are a great success for committing to bless another. And you young people decided Christ is going to be your Lord. I get it. We all do. That's not easy. You say that and you are challenged and you are tested and you sometimes fall. And yet that desire to know Him more and serve Him more and be like Him, regardless of what the world would say success is, I'm telling you, you stay loyal to Christ. That is a great success. And those of you who continue to invest into others without credit, without rewards, without recognition, but you can't help but stop and bless someone who's been walked by. Jesus is saying you're great and a great success for listening to His strategy. You may not feel great. You may not feel great at anything that the world thinks is important. But the truth is, you're great. Think about what those things are. Maybe you're great at listening to the needs of someone's heart. Maybe you're great at relating to younger people, or younger people, you're great at relating to those who are ahead of you in life. Or maybe you're just great at recognizing when something's not quite right with someone and paying attention in that moment. Maybe you're great at giving sacrificially when you have little to give. And here's my point this morning. That is success as an ideal, not an idol. It's success seen as serving others with what God gave me to do. And it's my belief that's what God put us on earth to do. And so to wrap up, it's not a sin to want to be great. It's not even a sin to want to be great at something. Just make sure the reason you want to be successful is that you want to be a servant to all. Because any other motivation toward greatness or success, according to Jesus, is idolatry. It's putting other ideals out there and serving them. There's a story that I loved about Albert Einstein. A lot of great stories about Einstein, but this one I heard the other day and I enjoyed it. His whole life, Newton and Maxwell were on any office wall he had, their pictures were up. That was his ideal of success. Later in life, someone noticed he had taken those pictures down and in their place put up Gandhi and Schweitzer. And they said, what's that about? And he said, well, the time has come to replace the image of success with the image of service. And as genius as he is, if he only knew, service is the only way to find success in God's eyes. You see, Jesus teaches that the mountain of success is a downhill climb. You're moving lower, you're serving more. And through service, we climb lower and lower against the grain of our culture. And if it makes you feel any better, it is the law of the kingdom, and even the king submitted to it. Whoever wants to become first among you must serve all of you like a slave. In the same way, the Son of Man did not come to be served. He came to serve others and to give his life a ransom for many people. That's the example our King has left. That's great. In fact, do you ever think about what makes Jesus great in the eyes of God? Listen to this. Christ himself was like God in everything, but he did not think that being equal to God was something to be used for his own benefit. But he came up to a place with God and made himself nothing. He gave up his place with God, made himself nothing. He was born as a man and became like a servant. And when he was living as a man, he humbled himself and was fully obedient to God, even when it caused his death on a cross. Jesus lived what he called us to do, a life of downward mobility, serving all, blessing all as we can. And I would just say this, it is idolatry for us to think that we can change this world from the top down. Jesus said, the gospel says, Christians believe we change the world from the bottom up. With a community committed, a reborn community committed to service of others. That is success. That is greatness in the eyes of Jesus. And so here's what I want you to do with this idol being called out this morning. I want you to think about Jesus, who emptied himself for you. And commit to be more like the great Samaritan. Didn't do any revolutionary thing. He just stopped and was a blessing to someone who others had walked by. Refuse to pass by. Be a blessing, and you'll be great. You'll have success. You'll be rich toward God and rich toward people. And you'll have treasure in heaven. And the greatest thing about treasure in heaven is, as we hear about it, there's no safes there. There's no security there. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be taken away. And so let's start planning on leaving our treasure there. You see, the call is to spend your life in service to others. We're about to sing an invitation song to encourage everyone, and I want to say it's for this purpose. The call to follow Jesus is a call to real greatness. Are you willing to serve like your master served you? Are you willing to be a blessing to others as God has blessed you? Are you willing to love, as we studied this morning, even your enemies? Because maybe then they can see the love Christ had for you. To do this starts with a commitment to put on Jesus Christ in baptism. If you're there, we want to offer that invitation to you now. Put on Christ. Let your sins be washed away and determined to look more and more like Jesus each day. If you're here and you need our prayers, I get it. There are many idols in this world that call our attention and our focus away from God. If we can help you, you let us know, and we'll pray for you this moment. But let's do that.